Picasso Feature Friday. My name is Tia, and today I will be interviewing a poet and activist. She's performed on BET, CBS, and even CNN. Here she is, Miss Kai Davis.
I don't know why I said Mrs., but anyways.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing great. It's so cool to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Did you come from a literary background, or was poetry something you found unexpectedly?
I guess it was in my genes. Like my father was a writer. I didn't even know he was a writer though when I started writing. I was just like a very avid reader. I was kind of like an indoor kid, and it gotten to the point where I was so like I wanted to read stories that were different, and the only real ways that I could do that was to write them. And so I started writing like little short stories, novellas, and stuff like that in like the 5th grade. And then it moved on to poetry once I got into middle school, and then in high school it sort of became like my life basically.
Oh, that's cool. So it has always been a part of you, and I loved how you wanted to see something different, so you took the initiative to make it yourself.
Yeah.
How did you get into spoken word? Do you think performing poetry is easy, or did you kind of have to get used to it?
So I got into spoken word a little bit after I started getting into poetry in high school. I joined a literary magazine club and a poetry club, and I was watching videos on YouTube like I know a whole bunch of other people were at the time and still are. So I got really into Def Jam, and then I got into performing it myself after like my father hosted a festival here in Germantown, a poetry festival, and so he had a bunch of there are some poets from Def Jam and some poets from Philadelphia Youth Poetry Movement. And I saw them live, and it was my first time seeing spoken word performed live, and I was like enthralled, and I ended up joining Philadelphia Youth Poetry Movement, and that's how I started like competing and doing open mics and stuff. And at first it was nerve-wracking, but then I found that it was somewhat easier for me as someone who like deals with social anxiety to be able to express myself and communicate without having to like do it one-on-one. Like I could just talk to a whole room, and instead of having to have those like intimate conversations with people, which I found harder than performing.
Yeah.
So there were nerves at first, but I think that in the end it became like a really, really important outlet and allowed me to sort of open up.
And do you have any poets that you really look up to that do spoken word or that just wrote?
Really loved Sunny Patterson and Queen Goddess when I first got into poetry. And then once I started entering into communities with people, I became just like, I started falling in love with the work of the people around me, like Denise Froman and Vision. Like those poets really introduced me to like the page world of poetry that I wasn't really knowing before that.
So can you please tell us about your experiences as a Black queer woman in America?
Oh, wow, loaded question. I definitely see the world differently than I think a lot of people do because of my experiences. But it's also allowed me to find a community of other Black queer women and Black queer trans people who have like fostered this sort of culture of like collective care and community and like really, really valuing me as a person. And so I don't know if I would be able to be as like outspoken and like, you know, here's all of me if it wasn't for that community of people. But I mean, it's definitely difficult, especially when it comes to certain issues where people are tackling the surface and they're not like, they don't consider, like, if a lot of queer people don't consider Black queer people when they're talking about policy changes and activism, and the same goes for like a lot of Black folks who aren't queer, they're not thinking about queer folks, or sometimes they're not thinking about Black women when they're,
which can be infuriating, because I feel like we all kind of have that same kind of we're all going through this kind of like struggle. We've all dealt with being excluded and not accepted by people.
Mm-hmm.
It would only make sense for the Black community to welcome, everybody in, and you just can't choose specific Black people to care for. You have to care for all of them. And do you have any advice for young artists to identify with the LGBTQ community but are too afraid to truly express themselves?
I guess my advice is that there will always be more love, care, and acceptance within those communities. And coming out and like being yourself can be very scary if you're in an environment that doesn't welcome that. But there's always communities that can, and then people, and like especially now with the way that like the LGBT communities and other communities of color are like rallying around like mutual aid funding and stuff. We're trying our best to take care of one another, and there are people who are like accomplices to help us fulfill those goals. And so if you're somewhere where you don't want to be, you can reach out to help, and there will be people who can help, get you somewhere where you need to be. Make that leap of faith, because at the end of the day, like, there's a bunch of people who are here to like love and care for you.
Yes. And how can young Black teens encourage others within our community to aspire to unify and accept the differences of all our people?
There has to be a energy put into like reading and educating. I think that there are a lot of young people who have the right mindset and the right politics, but have a hard time articulating it to their peers in a way that makes it more accessible with the people around them, because a lot of it is just common sense. The hard part is trying to break it down so that it can be received, especially when everyone's getting such conflicting messages from the media or from the church or from their masjid or from their teachers, etc. Trying to be open and honest with each other, and to like leave space for people to get it wrong.
And I definitely agreed with your part about understanding it, but having trouble articulating it, because I know it's not just like me, it's a lot of my friends as well. Like, we try having these deep conversations with our parents, and then sometimes we get so passionate about it and we get so driven, we can get very angry, and so it makes it hard for our parents to kind of relate to us and really take it in, because we're all fired up. But definitely, I agree, like, working with ways to kind of address the situation maybe more calmly would kind of help them open up more. But I don't know, I kind of think Gen Z and the millennials, we're all very powerful, and we speak our minds a lot. So I think we're going to get through to them eventually. We're going to get through and make a change.
I have a whole lot of faith in Generation Z, especially because I was a substitute teacher for a while. And like, so I did a really long-term substitute teaching position. And that was my first time like spending a lot of time with, teens in a minute. And I was like really, really impressed by how far like young people had come from when I was in high school. Cause I thought that we were doing well, but Generation Z is like really pushing to make wonderful changes, and that's how it should be.
Did y'all hear that? Cause we kind of cool, but child. Anyways,
hear that, guys? Generation. So can you please tell us about your roles as an activist? Because I've seen you on your Instagram page. I've been doing some research. You seem to be very outspoken. What projects have you taken on recently?
I launched a campaign fund with my partner, selling t-shirts and taking all the proceeds from those t-shirts to distribute them amongst Black mutual aid funds. So trying to keep the money not necessarily I guess like out of the hands of like large nonprofits who will usually be fine regardless, but trying to like divert attention to like more looked over funds. So there are like funds for Black trans people getting housing and medical care, funds for sex workers, funds for deaf folks who are trying to navigate the justice system and dealing with those disadvantages of trying to do that.
And how can we stay updated on what you're doing, the projects that you have coming up? How can we, hear more about it?
So you can keep up with me on Instagram and Twitter at Kai Davis Poet.
Great. Well, I will be sure to include your website, and I'll be sure to tag you in the video. Thank you so much for being here again. Okay, but before you go, do you have a poem that you can share with us today?
Yeah, is Ain't I a Woman okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I wake up with an apology already forming in my mouth. This is what it means to be a contradiction. Too Black to be a woman and not man enough to be Black. This is what it means to occupy a vacant space. Have everyone slash each cross-stitched intersection of my identity with a straight blade. Tell me to pick one label or none at all. But ain't I a woman? When the Black man tells me I'm too thick for my own good, when he follows me down the street, when I say no in 3 different octaves, ain't I a woman? When a white girl in my class calls us we, speaks of a universal need, says woman is the new Black, talks picket signs like I've never marched before, talks injustice like I never met a cop before. When she hushes me, then speaks on my behalf, ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman when the moon is full? When my mother rolls my naps in her palms, when my father shouts Harambe 7 times on New Year's Day. Ain't I been writing this poem for 3 years straight? Ain't Sojourner Truth been doing the same? Ain't Bell Hooks? Ain't Ntozake Shangain? This is the story that never makes the news. The vacant space that fills the airwaves, the silence of unwritten eulogies. Ain't this Liberia? Ain't this Haiti? Ain't this North Philly? And didn't a white girl closed mouth smile at me today? Tell me I'm beautiful, then hack apart my body, wear my lips, ass, and hair like a costume. Didn't she sell all 13 of my children and lynch my husband? Didn't she ask me to be quiet one too many times? And didn't I bruise a Black man's ego swole today? Ask him to stop calling my scars sacrifices, calling my suffering an inconvenience, a blemish on the Black man's movement, as if MLK didn't suck milk from a Black woman's tit. But ain't I a bitch? Ain't I bitter? Ain't I divisive by accident? Don't I complicate the revolution with all my grievances? Ain't I still grieving? Ain't this my middle finger? Ain't I'm finally done apologizing? I'm not an obstacle to navigate through. I'm the reason you are breathing. The feet that trod out the path, even the light that subverted all your darkness. Am I not the pulse of every one of your revolts? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't this a rhetorical question? Thank you.
That was it. That was
Thank
it. I can feel the power and I can feel that energy like radiating from the screen. And there were so many good points of it. Like when you talked about the white woman like using our lips and our bodies as a costume, that really did like speak to me. I was just like, whoa. Like I was just like, whoa, okay. That was really, really great. And the performance was amazing. And hopefully, I will be blessed to see you live one day. But again, guys, this is Kai Davis, the one and only. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye-bye.